So good morning to all. Dr. Bhatia said we will be presenting some clinically interesting cases of neurovascular disorder which are uncommon and they mainly had a neuroophthalmic manifestation. Aneurysm, as we know, aneurysm is very uncommon, is rare in children. And we had 3 cases of mycotic aneurysm of intracavernous part of ICA. And they all were the children of the pediatric age group. And they all had a past history of cellulitis of face and orbit and had meningitis. That helped us that led us to make the diagnosis of infective aneurysm of intracavernous part of ICA. Though these mycotic aneurysm are more commonly seen in the distal branches of MCA and the posterior cerebral artery, but our case was different in that way. They had involvement of the proximal part of ICA. The previous, as they all had a preceding infection, so they are mostly misdiagnosed as cavernous sinus thrombosis. As far in the literature, so far in the literature, only 50 cases of intracavernous part of ICA, mycotic aneurysm of intracavernous part of ICA has been reported. That shows the rarity of this entity. Most of these cases, they resolve on conservative treatment, but some need the endovascular procedure, which had been done in our cases. And Dr. Vivek will discuss about that. Another patient we had was a case of a branch retinal artery occlusion that was in a young patient. So the stroke in the young patient mainly causes are in the cardiac and the carotid system. And when we investigated the patient, and we found that it was the tubercular arteritis of the cervical part of ICA, which caused embolism to that branch retinal artery. So the patient had a only presentation of monocular visual field defect. As we, giant cell arteritis is another uncommon, is a rare entity which is seen in our India, which is much more common in the Western countries. And totally only 72 cases of giant cell arteritis are reported from India. They are from the tertiary healthcare centers and mainly from South, and some are from these case series are this in 72% cases, 72 cases include the small case series and the isolated case reports. Because of the rarity of this entity, it is usually there is a delay in the diagnosis of this condition, though it is an ophthalmic emergency because it results into the irreversible permanent visual loss. So hence an early diagnosis of this entity is important. And that's why the ophthalmologists, they come in the front line in the diagnosis of giant cell arteritis. We had 4 cases of arthritic type of anterior ischemic optic neuropathy. Out of these 4, the 3 cases had an ocular giant cell arteritis, which is also called silent giant cell arteritis. That means they had only the ocular features with positive temporal artery biopsy, but they didn't have any sign and systemic sign and symptom of giant cell arteritis. So these cases are, that's why it's difficult to diagnose GCA in these cases, unless they are seen by an ophthalmologist, because we have a very classical optic disc presentation in these cases by which we make a diagnosis of arthritic type of anterior ischemic optic neuropathy. The one patient, though out of these 4, one patient though fulfill the 4 criteria out of 11, according to the ACR classification of 2016, but his temporal artery biopsy was negative. And why it was negative, the possible causes of this we will discuss in our presentation, later presentation. In the USA, there were 85 cases of giant cell arteritis where the temporal artery biopsy was positive, and out of that case report was by an ophthalmologist, and he collected these cases over a period of 20 years. He found that 20% of the cases were of ocular giant cell arteritis. That means they had only ocular features with positive biopsy without any systemic sign and symptoms. Hence, the diagnosis of this is very important as it resulted in the irreversible, not only the monocular visual loss, the other eye involvement is seen in 30% of the cases of GCA. Now I will ask Dr. Isha to present the cases.
Good morning, everyone. I'll be presenting 3 cases of uncommon neurovascular sequelae of systemic and local infections in the pediatric age group. So the first case was a 10-year-old boy who presented to neuro-ophthalmology with complaint of drooping of left eyelid for 1 week. He gave a past history of having been treated for pyogenic meningitis following preseptal cellulitis of the left eye 1 month back, from which he had recovered completely while on systemic antibiotics. And at the time, his contrast CT scan was normal. On examination, it was found that the visual acuity was normal in the right eye and the eye examination was normal in the right eye, whereas the vision was subnormal in the left eye with complete ptosis and restricted ocular movements in all directions and absence of pupillary reaction, both light reaction and near reflex. All other findings in the left eye were within normal limits. Since the patient had given a history of meningitis 1 month back, we made a clinical diagnosis of left complete ophthalmoplegia secondary to cavernous sinus thrombosis. We ordered imaging of this patient. So the MRI revealed an aneurysm in the left cavernous sinus arising from the ICA, as we can see by the arrow in the picture. A CT angiography was done and it showed a lobulated aneurysm projecting supero-anteriorly from the cavernous part of left ICA. Now, because of this location of the aneurysm projecting supero-anteriorly, it was compressing the intracranial part of the optic nerve, and this could explain the subnormal vision in the left eye. Also, there was a small aneurysm at the petrous apex on the right side ICA. Mycotic aneurysms are known to be present at multiple locations. So in this case, we had bilateral aneurysms. A DSA was done, which showed a large aneurysm arising from the cavernous part of the left ICA and a small aneurysm in the right ICA as well. So the patient was put on a course of systemic antibiotics for 6 weeks. Infective aneurysms, some of them have been known to resolve after a course of antibiotics. So we gave a full course for 6 weeks and we did a serial imaging of this patient. However, there was no resolution of symptoms and the presence of compressive optic neuropathy persisted. So we had to do a neuroradiological intervention. So this is post-embolization. The right ICA shows good cross flow through the anterior communicating artery. And on follow-up, it was found that the vision had recovered completely after 1 week. And after 1 year, there was complete improvement of the 4th and 6th nerve palsy with partial improvement of 3rd nerve palsy. The patient has been in follow-up for more than 5 years now, and there have been no recurrences so far. So that was the first case. Coming on to the second case. Now, this was a 3-year-old who presented with complaint of inward deviation of left eye for 2 weeks. His medical records showed that he had been treated for orbital cellulitis, both sides, right worse than the left, secondary to multiple boils on the scalp. He had recovered completely following broad spectrum antibiotics, both injectable and a course of oral antibiotics. And at the time, again, his neuroimaging was normal. When we examined and the parents subsequently noticed that there was a development of inward deviation of the left eye. On examination, the visual acuity in the right side was normal and subnormal in the left side. The left eye showed inward deviation of the eye, and there was restriction of abduction. The rest of the movements were normal. This was suggestive of LR palsy on the left side. The pupillary reaction was normal, fundus was normal. In the right eye, there was mild pallor of the optic disc. And this could be due to the fact that orbital cellulitis, when it had occurred, it was worse on the right side. So a worse optic neuritis may have happened on the right side. So a clinical diagnosis of left lateral rectus palsy was made. Now, any acute onset 6th nerve palsy in this particular age group needs urgent neuroimaging. So we performed an MRI, and this showed flow void in the left cavernous sinus larger than the ICA on contrast enhancement, which shows contrast enhancement. The right cavernous ICA also showed a small fusiform aneurysm. So, and again, bilateral locations. An MRA was performed which revealed bilateral intracavernous ICA aneurysm. DSA of the left ICA shows a large saccular aneurysm in the cavernous part, and on the right side also there was a small fusiform aneurysm in the cavernous part. The patient was given antibiotics for 2 weeks, but there was no clinical improvement. Now this was, and the patient was going into strabismic amblyopia. So an urgent reconstructive procedure was required because the amblyopia would become denser if untreated, and it could lead to an irreversible visual loss. Coming on to the third case. This was a 14-year-old boy who presented with double vision for 2 months. Now, having seen and managed 2 cases of mycotic aneurysm, we were a little more cautious and we ordered both blood cultures and cell counts to rule out infection in this case. Also, he gave a past history of having a boil at the left angle of the mouth with cellulitis on left side of the face since 4 months back. So on examination, the patient had a right inward deviation of the eye. The vision was normal. Ocular motility showed restriction abduction in the right eye. The pupillary examination was normal, fundus was normal in both eyes, and his systemic examination was normal. The blood culture came out to be negative, while the hemogram showed leukocytosis and his inflammatory markers were raised. It is to be noted that the inflammatory markers were also raised in the first 2 patients that we had discussed. This patient had got his MRI done elsewhere, and they had reported that there was a cellular mass with contrast enhancement and extension in the right cavernous sinus, with ICA being pushed peripherally, and they had reported it as a cavernous hemangioma. Now, it is important to remember that cavernous hemangioma is uncommon in this age group, being more common in middle-aged females. Moreover, there is a temporal relation with infection of the face. So this is raising the possibility of an infective cause. So we just got a re-evaluation of MRI done at our institute, and the T2 weighted MRI shows sac-like outpouching of cavernous ICA with indication of turbulent flow, because as we can see, there is hyperintense on the periphery with a zone of hypointensity and hyperintense again in the core of the lesion. Post contrast, the MRI shows intense enhancement, which is again suggestive of mycotic aneurysm of the right cavernous ICA. So again, we gave a course of broad spectrum antibiotics for 6 weeks, and the 6th nerve palsy persisted, and the diplopia was bothersome for the patient. So he underwent neuroradiological intervention, and post occlusion of the ICA, there was no flow. On follow-up, the right 6th nerve palsy recovered completely. So I would like to summarize these 3 cases. All the 3 had presented with a late onset of partial or complete ophthalmoplegia following infections of the face or scalp, which had initially resolved with antibiotics. Keeping a high index of suspicion for an infective cause, we ordered blood cultures, cell counts, and brain imaging for these patients. There was leukocytosis and raised inflammatory markers in all the 3. Neuroimaging in all the 3 revealed aneurysms of intracavernous part of ICA. So we gave a brief course of broad spectrum antibiotics, and accordingly some neurological procedure was done, following which there was marked improvement in the ocular motor nerve palsies. And the 3 patients are in follow-up, and till date no recurrences have been found. A brief discussion about mycotic aneurysm. It is a dilation of an artery due to damage of the vessel wall by an infection. It is also called as infective aneurysm. Mycotic aneurysm is a historical term. It is actually a misnomer. These are common in distal branches of the MCA and PCA at their bifurcations. Mycotic aneurysm of proximal part of ICA is relatively rare. Mycotic aneurysm of intracavernous ICA typically presents as a cavernous sinus syndrome and is often confused with cavernous sinus thrombosis, which may also be coexisting. Now, as this aneurysm has a greater tendency to rupture, resulting in massive hemorrhage, early diagnosis and treatment is mandatory. As we know that major venous drainage of the face goes into the cavernous sinus, that from the orbit communicates with the cavernous sinus through the superior and inferior ophthalmic veins. And as we can see, the facial vein also communicates with the cavernous sinus through the deep facial vein via pterygoid venous plexus. Moreover, it is to be noted that these veins are valveless, so infections from the face and scalp can easily go to the cavernous sinus. The two cavernous sinuses are also interconnected by the anterior and posterior intercavernous sinus. So infection from one can spread into the other also. In patients of ocular motor nerve palsies following local or systemic infection, the presence of infective aneurysm of cavernous ICA should be suspected. Endovascular treatment should be done after a course of antibiotics only, because first of all, it is because it is known to reduce in size on antibiotic therapy alone. We did a review of literature on the mycotic aneurysms of intracavernous part of internal carotid artery. These are some of the studies of which, and the ones which are highlighted are the ones which have been done in India. So there are 3 studies, and of all these studies, 11 cases were known to have occurred in the pediatric age group. So this concludes my presentation. I would now kindly request Dr. Vivek to tell us something about the endovascular procedures that were done in these cases.
As presenter and Kubni ma'am has said that intracavernous part of ICA mycotic aneurysms are a rare entity, and moreover they are rare in the children age group. They are more rare in the pediatric age group, and their management is also very typical, because we have to first look for the cross flow. If there is a good cross flow, then only we can think of doing a destructive type of procedure like occluding the artery. If there is no cross flow, then we have to think of some constructive type of therapy like the flow diverter. And the placement of any stent graft or a flow diverter in a pediatric age group is also very challenging, because in a pediatric age group you have to lower the dose of antiplatelets, and the child has to take antiplatelet lifelong. So these stent and stent assisted or the flow diverter type of treatment are generally not recommended for pediatric age group until unless damn necessary. So very less cases are there in the literature which have where the flow diverter has been placed for these type of aneurysms in pediatric age group, and they are only done if there is no cross flow. So in all the 3 cases where we have done these procedures, we have done few more cases, but in the cases which have been discussed here, in the first case there was again a bilateral cavernous IC aneurysm, the larger one which treated with coiling of the aneurysm and the parent vessel, and the other side was having a small aneurysm. So we kept that patient aneurysm in a follow-up, so that if it grows in a later age group, then we will place a flow diverter, and that would also give time for the child to grow. And we have kept that aneurysm on follow-up, and it has not increased in size. It has been same size for last 5 years. And the second child was a 2-year-old child with bilateral aneurysms of the cavernous sinus, and there was the largest side, or I don't remember it was right or the left. If we were, it was not the cross flow was not good. So our plan was to do a constructive procedure for that, but the child was not having the money, and so we couldn't offer him the treatment. And the third child was a unilateral mycotic aneurysm, and there was good cross flow. So we just and again the child was not having enough funds, but we did it with the vascular plug. We occluded the aneurysm and the parent vessel with the vascular plug. Vascular plug is relatively cheaper than coils, so we did that procedure with the vascular plug, and there was finally there was a good cross flow, and luckily all of these patients didn't have any intracranial symptoms, like they didn't develop any stroke after the procedure. So for any mycotic type of aneurysm, most of the time you have to occlude the artery, or you have to take care of the aneurysm with the flow diverter. For the cavernous segment, you have to look for the cross flow before deciding any treatment. And the course of antibiotic is very necessary, because most of the time we have seen we have 2 patients on follow where only the antibiotics, after antibiotic the aneurysm has resolved, the arteries has artery angiographic structure has improved. So we are following those patients on simply on angiography or on imaging, and we haven't done anything for them. Thank you.
I'll be presenting one more case. This was a 30-year-old female whose sole complaint was having an inferonasal field defect in the left eye for 2 months. On further inquiry, she said that she used to get transient blurring of vision in the left eye, which lasted for less than 1 minute. On examination, the vision was normal in both the eyes, ocular motility was normal, pupil was sluggishly reacting in the left eye, normal in the right eye. The fundus showed mild temporal pallor of the disc in the left side and normal in the right eye. The rest of the systemic examination was normal, except that her submandibular lymph nodes on the left side were significantly enlarged, non-tender, firm, not fixed to underlying structures. We did a perimetry, and this is the field on the right side, which was normal. The left side, however, is showing an inferonasal visual field defect. An OCT was done. The OCT showed retinal nerve fiber layer loss superiorly, which is corresponding to inferonasal field defect. We made a diagnosis of superotemporal branch retinal artery occlusion in the left eye, and the patient was investigated for source of thromboembolism. Since she was a relatively young age female, we also kept the possibility of Takayasu arteritis in mind. On investigation, her hemogram, biochemistry, coagulation profile were normal. As we know that most of the thromboembolic phenomena come from the heart, so we did a echo and ECG, which was normal, and Montague's test was found to be positive. Echo, ECG, and cardiac examination were normal. We ordered a carotid Doppler. Now this showed diffuse thickening of the left CCA and left ICA, and the velocity of blood flow was low. The CT scan, the cranial CT scan was normal. A CT angiogram of the neck and upper thorax was done. It showed an aneurysm in the descending aorta and hypodense lobulated mass in the right upper lobe and the left lower lobe of the lungs, as seen here. And there was also enlargement of cervical lymph nodes. We did a biopsy of her submandibular lymph nodes, which showed caseating granulomas typical of tubercular origin. So tubercular arteritis at the ICA origin had resulted from spread of infection from adjoining tubercular lymph node, and that was the cause of thromboembolism to the branch retinal artery. As there was tubercular lymphadenitis with arteritis of left CCA and ICA with pulmonary TB and mycotic aneurysm of descending aorta, the patient was given a course of ATT and steroids for 1 year. So on treatment, the patient stopped having further attacks of transient monocular visual loss. This is the picture post-treatment. Carotid Doppler and CT angiogram shows normal wall and lumen of the left CCA and ICA. There was significant resolution of cervical lymph nodes. However, stenting of mycotic aneurysm was done, of the aorta was done because it had not resolved on ATT. So monocular visual field defect in our case was secondary to thromboembolic phenomena from the arteritis of carotid artery caused by tubercular lymphadenitis of adjoining lymph nodes. The patient responded markedly to ATT and antiplatelet therapy and steroids. Ocular stroke may be the sole presenting manifestation of cervical carotid arteritis due to adjoining cervical tubercular lymphadenitis. Now, transient monocular vision loss in a young female is mostly due to Takayasu arteritis. In Takayasu, however, there is diffuse involvement of large vessels arising from aorta on imaging, and peripheral pulses are feeble. Both of these findings were absent in our case. It is important to differentiate Takayasu from tubercular arteritis because their management differs. It is to be noted that transient monocular vision loss is not common in Takayasu, and if at all it happens, it is mostly bilateral. Secondly, ischemic retinopathy is more common in Takayasu than branch retinal artery occlusion. And as mentioned, she did not have any systemic features like feeble peripheral pulses. The management, as we already know, differs because Takayasu will respond to steroids and antiplatelets, whereas in tubercular arteritis, ATT and steroids will form the mainstay of treatment. Thank you.
Good morning, respected teachers and colleagues. I am presenting 4 cases of arthritic anterior ischemic optic neuropathy due to giant cell arteritis. Giant cell arteritis is rare in India. It is an ophthalmic emergency and it results in a permanent visual loss. Hence, it is necessary to diagnose and manage it early to prevent visual loss. On retrospective analysis of 30 cases of anterior ischemic optic neuropathy presented to our OPD for last 5 years, only 4 cases were found to have arthritic as a cause of anterior ischemic optic neuropathy. First case, a 60-year-old male presented with a complaint of burning and pain sensation in right temporal area for 3 to 4 weeks and sudden loss of vision in right eye for 1 day. On past history, he was a known case of diabetes mellitus, hypertension and ischemic heart disease and were under treatment for the last 4 years. On examination, right-sided superficial temporal artery was palpable, non-pulsatile and mild tenderness were present. Visual acuity in right eye, absence of perception of light. In left eye, the vision was 6/6. Right eye, there was movement were full and free in all direction. Pupil show apparent pupil defect and fundus show peridysc while left eye was completely normal. We can see here the fundus picture of the right eye, in which the disc show the typical feature of ischemic optic neuropathy, that is a peridysc edema, along with the blood vessels were normal and the dull foveal reflex. Clinical diagnosis of right eye arthritic anterior ischemic neuropathy was made due to marked visual loss, typical fundus finding of peridysc edema, age which was greater than 50 years, superficial temporal artery tenderness and which are non-pulsatile. Blood sample of the patient was sent for complete hemogram, C-reactive protein, and IV methylprednisolone 1 gram per day started immediately. Because immediate treatment can lead to the recovery of the image and prevent the further manifestation of the other eye. Burning in the temple area and the tenderness of STA was read after 2 days. On investigation, the hemogram show raised level of ESR, that is 83, and C-reactive protein 18.6. On 3rd day, superficial temporal artery biopsy was done under admission, and 1 centimeter of the segment of the frontal branch of the STA was removed and sent for histopathology. This is the longitudinal cut section of the vessel STA, which show multiple granulomas and with the multinucleated giant cell along with the fibrosis and the foci of the calcification, and the walls are markedly thickened. This slide shows the high magnification of the previous slide, which show spindle-shaped epithelioid cells along with the lymphoplasmacytic infiltrates and fibrosis in all the layers of the vessel wall with the marked thickening of the vessel wall. On treatment, IV methylprednisolone 1 gram per day for 5 days was given, followed by oral prednisolone 1 milligram per kg body weight, that is 60 milligram per day for 3 weeks. And the patient was advised to follow after 3 weeks with continuous monitoring of the blood sugar, blood pressure, along with ESR and C-reactive protein. After 3 weeks, his ESR and C-reactive proteins values were markedly reduced to 36 mm and 0.323 respectively. He was advised to decrease steroid 5 milligram per day and to come after 2 weeks. On the subsequent follow-up, we see his ESR was 15 mm and C-reactive proteins come to 0.303, but his recurrent blood levels were high. So we thought of adding methotrexate, and because the chances of and gradual tapering of the steroid, because the chances of other eye involvement reduce if we reduce to 5% if we initiate early treatment and continue for at least 2 months, for which we referred him to the immunology department. After where he was prescribed methotrexate, After 2 to 3 months of treatment with methotrexate, patient developed pneumonitis. Methotrexate therapy was stopped and the patient was shifted to monthly IV immunologist. Coming on to case 2, a 70-year-old male presented to us with a complaint of headache on and off for 2 to 3 months, sudden loss of vision right eye for 2 months back, and sudden loss of vision in the left eye for 10 days. Past history, known case of diabetes mellitus and hypertension for last 3 years and was under treatment. On examination, both sided superficial temporal artery was mild, tender, and non-palpable. Visual acuity, right eye, absence of perception of light, and in left eye, also absence of perception of light. Right eye, the movements were full and free in all directions. Pupils show apparent pupil defect, and the fundus show optic atrophy. While in left eye, the movements were also full and free in all directions. Pupils show apparent pupil defect with fundus pallidus edema. This is a fundus picture of the right eye, which show enlarged cup and chalky white disc, which show the complete atrophy of the complete optic atrophy. While in the left eye, we can see the pallid disc edema of the left eye, along with the blood vessels were normal and the foveal reflexes were dull. On investigation, hemogram show raised level of TLC, that is 13.6 thousand cells per cubic mm, ESR 75, and C-reactive protein 8.46. After blood sampling, IV methylprednisolone 1 gram per day was started, and superficial temporal artery biopsy was performed. On cross section of the artery, we can see the occlusion of the lumen with marked intimal fibrosis and transmural inflammatory cell infiltrate, which is composed of lymphocytes, plasma cells, and few polymorphs. There are also some cell debris present, and there's a disruption of the internal elastic lamina. Treatment: IV methylprednisolone 1 gram per day for 3 days was given, followed by oral prednisolone 1 milligram per kg body weight per day for 3 weeks. Advised to follow after 3 weeks with continuous monitoring of blood sugar, blood pressure, along with the ESR and C-reactive protein values. After 3 weeks, ESR and C-reactive values were markedly decreased, which came to around 40 mm and 0.43 respectively, and there was improvement in the headache. We advise to taper steroid and follow up monthly. Patient has been on follow-up for last 6 months. Then coming on to case 3, a 65-year-old female referred to us with a diagnosis of right eye optic neuritis, with chief complaint of holocranial headache off and on for 1 month and sudden loss of vision for 3 weeks. Past history: patient was on a course of IV methylprednisolone followed by oral prednisolone for optic neuritis according to the ONTT trials. There was no history of diabetes mellitus and hypertension. On examination, right eye superficial temporal artery perception was absent and non-tender. Visual acuity: in right eye, absence of perception of light, and in left eye, 6/6. Right eye show movements were full and free in all directions. Pupil APD present. Fundus mild pallid disc edema with splinter hemorrhage. We can see here the mild pallid disc edema in the right eye with a splinter hemorrhage here. The blood vessels were normal and the foveal reflex was dull. While in left eye, the fundus were within normal limit. On investigation, hemogram show raised level of platelet around 4.9 lakhs per ml, ESR 30 mm per hour, and C-reactive protein 1.5. Superficial temporal artery biopsy was not performed as the patient was on steroid for last 2 to 3 weeks, which give a false impression on biopsy. Diagnosis of arthritic anterior ischemic optic neuropathy due to giant cell arthritis was made on the basis of history, that is age greater than 50 years, examination, non-pulsatile superficial temporal artery, pallid disc edema with splinter hemorrhage, and raised level of ESR and C-reactive protein. Oral steroid of 1 milligram per kg per day was given and tapered according to ESR and C-reactive protein levels over a period of 6 to 7 months. and was kept on low dose of steroid for next 6 months. Coming on the last case, a 76-year-old male referred to us from immunology department with a probable diagnosis of GCA for superficial temporal artery biopsy. He was admitted with the complaints of fever, body ache, pain and stiffness in proximal joints, jaw claudication for last 2 to 3 months, and sudden visual loss in right eye for 2 to 3 months back. Past history: patient was on oral prednisolone 50 milligram per day prescribed elsewhere, and no history of diabetes mellitus and hypertension. On examination, both sided superficial temporal artery perfusion was absent and non-tender. Visual acuity in right eye, no absence of perception of light, and in left eye 6/60, which improved to 6/24 on with pinhole. Right eye movement were full and free in all direction. Pupils show APD. Fundus optic atrophy was present, which might be due to the CRO, which was diagnosed elsewhere in the previously. Left eye movement were full and free in all direction. Pupils show APD and fundus optic atrophy. We can see here that there's enlargement of cup with atrophy of the right eye and left eye both, but we can see here there's a more atrophy of the right eye over the left eye. On investigation, hemogram show raised level of TLC, that is 17.2 thousand cells per cubic mm. Platelets were also raised 4.6 lakh per ml. ESR and CRT were also raised around 30 and 3.45 values respectively. On USG, it shows left-sided STA shows doubtful halo sign. Superficial temporal artery biopsy was performed, which showed thickened walled muscular blood vessels, lumen narrowing with intimal fibrosis, but no inflammation of giant cell was seen. Diagnosis of the arthritic anterior ischemic optic neuropathy due to giant cell arthritis was made on the basis of symptoms: jaw claudication, non-pulsatile STA, bilateral vision loss, thrombocytosis, leukocytosis, and raised level of ESR and C-reactive protein. He is a followed in immunology OPD. Summary: the age of all cases is more than 50 years. Out of 4 cases of GCA, 3 follow the American College of Rheumatology classification criteria. All cases have visual loss due to arthritic anterior ischemic optic neuropathy, and 1 had also CRO. Superficial temporal artery tenderness present in 2 cases. Superior temporal artery perfusion absent in all cases. ESR and C-reactive protein were raised in all cases. Out of the 4 cases, 2 had occurred DCA, that is, they had ocular features of GCA and temporal artery biopsy was positive. 1 had ocular features of GCA with raised inflammatory markers with no systemic features. Other patient has prominent systemic feature and visual loss, but temporal artery biopsy was negative. The patient had been on steroid for more than 3 weeks. The STA might not be involved as the escape lesion in the section might be from the normal segment of the artery. STA biopsy was positive in 2 cases and STA biopsy was negative in 1 case. In 1 case, STA not done as patient was on steroid for more than 2 to 3 weeks. In which cases the biopsy would not be confirmatory. Giant cell arteritis is a granulomatous vasculitis of large and medium vessels. Mainly involves the extracranial branch of carotid artery. Common in Western countries, rare in Asia and Indians. Hence, it is underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed in our country. American College of Rheumatology in 1990, it gives a GCA classification which include 5 criteria: age greater than 50 years, ESR greater than 50 mm per hour, superficial temporal artery tenderness, nodular or non-pulsatile, STA biopsy should be positive, and next, new onset of headache in elderly patient. Either 3 or more than 3 criteria should be fulfilled, but this classification has certain drawbacks, like it does not include the vision loss or jaw claudication. So in 2016, there was a revised classification has been proposed, which include a more extensive set of criteria, it has been suggested that in presence of 3 points or more out of 11 with at least 1 point belonging to domain 1, the diagnosis of GCA can be established. However, this is yet to be evaluated. This is the RC classification 2 of 2016, which include age of onset greater than 50 years or absence of exclusion criteria. Domain 1 include never onset localized headache, which has given 1 point, sudden onset of visual loss, which has given 1 point, and polymyalgia rheumatica given 2 points. Jaw claudication 1 point, abnormal temporal artery 2 points. In domain 2, unexplained fever and or anemia has given 1 point, raised ESR greater than 50 given 1 point, with compatible pathology reports 2 points. Exclusion criteria are including ENT and eye inflammations, kidney and skin and peripheral nervous system involvement, lung infiltration, lymphadenopathies, stiff neck, and distal gangrenes or ulceration.
Do you think we can write up soon? Because
Yes,
Did you finish,
two
Rehan?
slides are remaining.
Diligent.
Total 72 cases of GCA reports from India, mainly from the tertiary care center. Cumulative Indian data of 72 cases show mean age of 67 years, delay in diagnosis of 3 months, ESR raised in 94% cases, positive biopsy in 75% cases, and superficial temporal artery tenderness in 73% cases. On comparing Indian data from Western data, Indians have early age of onset, that is 69 years, male preponderance, higher ophthalmic complication, and low temporal artery biopsy positivity. Thank you.